الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم افتح إلينا حكمتك وانشر علينا رحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. ونعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله. So Ghazali is saying لأنه لم يرد في الدين طريق إلا معرفته لأنه لا حاجة في الدين إلى معرفته لأن الدين هو المجاهدة. Because the deen is a struggle, it's a mujahada. And the alama of ma'rifah, the sign of knowledge, is al-hidayah, is that you are guided. Which is a very interesting statement to make. The sign of a knowledgeable person is not that he is able to say so many things or give every answer possible to every question you ask, or demonstrate his abilities in front of the people, or his credentials. He's saying that the sign of a knowledgeable person, or the sign of knowledge in a person, is that he is rightly guided. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Those who struggle with us, we will guide them on the right pathways. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَجْتَهِدْ حَقَّ اجْتِهَادِهِ وَمَنْ لَمْ يَجْتَهِدْ حَقَّ اجْتِهَادِهِ لَمْ يَجُزْ أَنْ يَتَحَدَّثَ مَعَهُ فِي مَعْرِفَةِ حَقِيقَةِ الرُّحْ. He's saying that the one who doesn't actually struggle in the religion and he is not exerting all his efforts in the struggle of a righteous path to gain the knowledge of the deen and to act on it, has got no business. In fact, the word he's used is it's not even permissible for him to talk about the reality of the Ruh. In other words, he's got no business talking about the Ruh if you're not doing what you were created to do. Your purpose, in other words, is not to know what the Ruh is. It's to understand what your heart is. And this is what he's distinguishing between the two. The haqiqah of the heart is not the Ruh. And your objective is not to find out what the Ruh is, right? وأول أس المجاهدة أن تعرف أسكار القلب لأن الإنسان إذا لم يعرف الأسكر لم يصح له الجهاد. The foundational point of beginning this mujahada is to know what are the soldiers of the heart. Because without knowing what the soldiers of the heart are, you cannot go into the battlefield. And the battlefield is the world around you. This is the reality. For you to be able to go out there and understand reality, you need to know what the instruments are, what are your soldiers. And that's where he's going to talk about the senses and how the senses integrate with the understanding of or the interpretation of the reality, and how the heart works in tandem with the body to comprehend reality and adjust itself accordingly and act in the right manner. Are there any questions?
Yeah, what did you mean when you said the qalb or ruh is the origin of Adam, and then you said its place is consciousness of Allah?
He said, فَالرُّوحُ هُوَ أَصْلُ ابْنُ آدَمْ وَقَلْبُ ابْنُ آدَمْ تَبْعَ لَهُ فَكَيْفَ يَكُونُ أَرْضًا. He was referring to refuting the point that the ruh is something that is of a phenomenal reality. And so the reason why also I'm putting emphasis on this is because of this bid to try and find consciousness in the body, like to break it down right down to the cell and the DNA to see if consciousness exists there. And what he's saying is that it doesn't exist there. I mean, at that time, obviously, they didn't know about all these advanced technologies and everything, but he's giving a universal here, that the Ruh has got no material reality. It's not a phenomenon. It's not an arad. And therefore, you're not going to find it in the created world of material, in the materially created world. So he's saying that the Ruh is the Aslu ibn Adam. It is the thing that made Adam come to life. So Allah had already created Adam's body and his essence and everything. And then he breathed into him life. And Allah is the one who animates everything. And he does that through the Ruh. Which is why the Ruh is min amri Rabbi. It's from the affair of my Lord. And it is that amr that makes everything alive. So it's like trying to ask the question of what is life? How does life actually happen? Right? If you just take a minute to think about that question, you'll come to realize how complicated it is to actually understand that. The materialists, of course, argue that life is just biological catabolic states and anabolic states and cell division and all that. That's what they call life. But that's just a material algorithm. A cell breaks into two and then breaks into four because it's been designed to do that. It's designed by Allah to do that. But what gives it the life of doing that? See, when they argue things like, oh, natural selection did this and natural selection did that, like we argue back and say, I mean, gee, it sounds like natural selection is doing a lot of things. Where's the will to do all those things coming from? Right? It's not just acting on impulse. And even if it's acting on impulse, where's the impulse coming from? There's an amr, right? There's a will.
They try to say it's random.
Yeah, or it's random, and yeah, it's just got no design, it's just spontaneous. It sounds like things are just happening by themselves. It's like, how do you explain that?
You also talked about something having knowledge and ignorance at the same time is impossible.
Yeah.
What about the people of the heights, the people in between, the fire and the Jannah, who are standing on the heights, and Allah didn't decides to forgive them. In Surah, Surah.
I
About the three different people.
I don't think that's connected to what Ghazali is saying here, because what he's using this is as a he's using it as an allegory to explain his reasoning here. He's saying that you can't say that the Ruh is a created thing that's material, and then at the same time say that it's a spiritual thing, because it can't be two things at the same time. And it's like saying that this it would be from, so wakana min janibil jahla wakana min janibil jahli jahilan wa min janibil ilma wa min janibil ilmi aliman. It would be from the aspect of ignorance ignorant, and then from the aspect of knowledge knowledgeable. So it's like saying that when it's ignorant it's got ignorance, and then when it is knowledgeable it's got knowledge. But then it's a contradicting statement, because he then says kullu shay'in yakunu fihi ilmun wa jahlun, like nothing, a thing cannot have knowledge and ignorance at the same time. It's an impossibility, because once you know something, you know it. Like you can't actually unknow something. You can forget something, yeah, but it's still there, and forgetting doesn't mean it's gone out of existence. You're just not able to recall it. That's what memory is. You forgot it, so you're trying to remember it, right? But it's still there, it's in you, you know it. So you can't unknow something. Once you know it, it's there. Now, if you don't know it, then you're ignorant about it, right? So you're either in a state of knowing or you're in a state of ignorance. You can't be both at the same time. It would be.
That also that was alluding to people how the Dhaleen are the ignorant and the the knowledgeable or the believers, but the munafiq are those who know it, but they choose not to follow
Yeah.
their knowledge.
Yeah, and inshallah that's also part of the heart as well. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Shu'ara, He says, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونٌ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهُ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. That on that day nothing will benefit, not your wealth or your children or your progeny or all that you accumulated in this world, except the one who comes to Allah with a sound heart. And qalb salim is a sound heart that is free of the defects and spiritual blemishes. Yani it's not the physical heart, it's the spiritual heart that is free of the blemishes and the diseases of the heart, right? The Quran, one of the foremost thing that the Quran does is it makes a distinguishment between three categories of people: the mu'minun, the munafiqun, and the kafirun. And the mu'minun is described as someone who has a sound heart, and the kafirun is somewhere in between. But the munafiq is someone who has a diseased heart, right? The kafir has just rejected the message. And Ghazali and other scholars distinguish different categories of kufr, of different types of kafirun, and what their level of kufr is. But the munafiq, because you can be a kafir and never heard the truth, and you could be a kafir and you would be dealt with in a different way. But the munafiq is somebody who knows the truth. He's not ignorant about it. He knows, he is in a state of knowing. But he's got that zayg, or the zagha in his heart, the perversion and deviation as a disease that makes him do what he does. In his outward he's portraying something else, in his inward he's portraying something else.
And also you talked about how physical things occupy space, measurement, and the output. How can, when you said the ruh can't occupy space, and we don't know how it exists, we don't know its output, but can't it be measured? I mean, the qalb can be measured basically on how much good or bad you did on that day, right? Or like throughout your life.
You can't actually measure the qalb in that. What you would be measuring is the deeds. You would be measuring the actual actions, and even then you would not actually be measuring the actions, you would be evaluating them. It's more of an estimation, because you can't actually measure how much good has no quantity.
Yeah.
Evil has no quantity, so you can't actually measure how much good did you do. Oh, I did like 20 mangoes worth of good, or something of the likes, right? I did 40 sacks of good.
Your hal determines whether you're good or bad in that moment.
Yeah, your hal also makes a difference as to how well you will be good in that moment, because you could be a bit good, or you could go all out. Like in philanthropy, for instance, you could be doing charity work and you decide to give a little. For instance, you go to the masjid and you're not really in the mood or something, and your hal is a bit, and you just give a little bit, right? But it's still a good action. But another time you could come to the masjid and you're happy and you're joyous and you give a lot more. The amount of good is not measured by how much you gave, it's by how much internal exertion you put into it, how much you actually meant it, how willingly you did it.
The world is meaning acting in form, and form consists of a shape or a symbol. So shouldn't the symbols or shapes of things connected to the meaning?
Yeah. So the shape.
Similar looking things have similar meaning.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. For instance, ape and man have the same or similar body shape. but one has a completely different meaning to its reality, the other has a different meaning to its reality. And this is what they mean, is that if you only go by judging things in their outward forms, then everything can look the same to you. Ultimately, everything would look the same to you, because if you break down matter to the smallest particular possible, all the atoms look the same, right? They might have different configurations in their composition, number of neutrons, protons, and electrons, but they all look the same. So how would you equate one to the other? What distinguishes them is their inward reality. So the inward reality of the human being is that he is able to speak. And that speech is not something that is biologically driven. Even though the human body does have a more complex brain compared to the brain of a chimp, right? But the speech component is something that is embedded onto the soul of the human being, in the heart, and he's able to articulate himself. The articulation is him being able to express what he is thinking or feeling. And that thinking and feeling takes place in the heart, which the monkey cannot do, or he can, but to a certain limitation, because some animals do have a bit of a higher intelligence compared to their peers. They're able to express themselves in one way or another. Like animals do express themselves when they're hungry, right? This is part of their speech, their logic, their nutq. So Sulaiman was taught mantiq at-tayr, right? He was taught the logic or the speech, and speech is logical. So he was taught the speech of the birds, how the birds communicate. But the human beings communicate on a much more sophisticated level. And so if you look at the kind of sounds that the human beings can make compared to animals, I believe birds can make about 12 sounds, 12 phonetic sounds. Monkeys are much less. They can only make about 8 phonetic sounds. But the human being can make over 100 phonetic sounds. If you look at that, 100 phonetic sounds with different configurations, that's a very sophisticated language system that animals can never catch up to.
Because before that, Allah talks about how the disbelievers attribute, daughters to him as the angels.
Hmm.
He's basically saying, like, how can you attribute daughters to Allah, and make them female, and the female is, do they attribute to him those who are brought up in fineries and are not commanding in disputes? Still, they have labeled the angels for servants of the most compassionate as freedom.
Which ayah number is that? I think
The ayah 18, Surah 43.
Oh, our man nusha'u, right? Our man yunasha'u, sorry, astaghfirullah. Our man yunasha'u fil hilyati wa huwa fil khisami غير مبين. وجعلوا الملائكة الذي هم عباد الرحمن إناثا أشهدوا خلقهم ستكتب شهادتهم ويسألون. I don't think it talks about women in that.
Why is he talking about? He says in the English, at least the English, it says in 15, it says, still the pagans have made some of his creation out to be a part of him. Indeed, humankind is clearly ungrateful. Has he taken angels as his daughters from what he has created in favor of you, all pagans? When one of them is given the good news of what they had attributed to the most compassionate, his face grows gloomy as he suppresses his rage. They attribute to him those who are brought up in fineries and are not commanding in disputes. So it is talking about the female and how,
I'm not sure, but you probably have to look at what the tafsir would say regarding this, because there will definitely be a contextual meaning. And then there will be some scholarly explanation from that. I would suggest you look at like Ibn Kathir's tafsir first, because he uses the naqli method, so he tells you what the scholars before him, going all the way to Ibn Abbas, what they said on that particular tafsir, on that ayah, and then you could probably look at some of the other explanations. But it to me, from just understanding it, um, it sounds like Allah is speaking to the mushrikeen and the association that they did to Allah with regards to Allah having children.
But he focuses on the part that he made the angels female, and he attributes female, descendants to him. And that's when he talks about, those who are brought up in fineries, and when they're not commanded in disputes. Or another translation I heard that when they dispute, they can't express themselves clearly.
In general sense, yeah, for as far as like women are concerned, they are, and this is why the woman is considered the other half. Your deen being half complete doesn't mean that you have completed your religion as a half. It means that your way of life is not a lonesome way of life. Your journey has that other component that has to go with it, and that the man his aql is very logical and rational, and the woman takes that other side of the emotional side. Now, often you'll find that things might make logical sense, but you wouldn't do them out of emotion. Like the arguments that they make about gay marriage, right? Oh, it's just love. The only logical thing is to marry them, right? But in your heart, there's a conflict, and that's an emotional conflict. It's not a rational conflict. Because as far as the rationality is concerned, they're saying, oh, it's just sexual, right? All animals are doing it, right? So why can't we do it? No, there's an emotional attachment. Why? The emotional attachment that Muslims have, that even Christians have, is with the scripture. That their Lord has told them they shouldn't do it. And they're doing it out of obedience. So oftentimes you'll find that it's the women that actually push their men to go to the masjid and go and pray, right? Wake up for Fajr, wake up for suhoor. It's the women that do it. So they bring in the second component as far, and they are designed in that regard. Even though the ayah doesn't talk about like jewels and all that stuff, I guess this would be something that maybe some of the scholars would have said, yeah, this is why women love the beautification of things, because jewels and jewelry are adornments, they are beautifications. Because there's no logical affiliation to beautification. Design, in terms of logical design, doesn't warrant embellishment. Architecture, it has to function. That's the logic has to function. So anything that the man does is as far as functionality is concerned, right? So men will generally try to, for instance, when you want to eat food, men will not really spend too much time or effort trying to think it out too much, right? They'll just make something for themselves that's functional, because the need is just to fulfill the hunger. So men will just probably heat something up, or just make a couple of eggs or something, and it's as long as it's functional, as long as it's working, it's fine for me. But a woman will actually make the effort to try and make the food nice and put it in a nice plate and garnish it and all that other stuff, because women are more inclined towards the emotional element. It's art has to do with emotion. And this is why the language arts are very emotionally driven. Poetry, literature, creativity, they're more emotionally driven, whereby sciences are more logically driven, like math and physics and all that. They're more logically driven. And it's important to distinguish here that it's not meant to belittle women in any way. And I don't like getting into this kind of a discussion generally, but what I'm saying is it's important to ensure that we shouldn't get into this modus of trying to compare one to the other, because men are different from women, and women are different from men, and men have their weaknesses and women have their weaknesses, but women also have their strengths that can override men's weaknesses, and likewise men have strengths that override women's weaknesses. It doesn't mean that just because a man is more functional in society as far as career and industry and all that goes, whereas women are less inclined towards that, doesn't make women lower in grade. It doesn't make them lower in rank. It's just that the way Allah has created this dynamic between male and female is that they both complement each other. They each fulfill the other. And that's what our religion entails. When we say that marriage fulfills half your deen, that's what it means. It completes the other half. So men can be rational and logical, and this is, by the way, it's not compartmentalization of anything. This is a spectrum, and the spectrum begins from being fully analytical to fully synthetic, and that's how language is determined, because we express through language as well. So on the one hand, you have something that's completely analytical, that's logical, that's rational, but then on the other hand, you've got this dynamic fluidity, this synthetic ability to adapt. And this is something that women have as a very strong quality, because they can adapt to the man's lifestyle. Men are more rigorous. They have a hard time adapting to changes, especially over time. They become very stagnated in their comfort zones. But women are the ones who are able to change that. They're able to push men forward. And, like the old saying goes, behind every successful man is a woman. Why is the woman? It doesn't mean she's behind because she's in rank lower than the man. It's because she's the one who actually drives the whole affair forward. Man is the functional element, but the woman is the one who actually pushes the man to be functional. Likewise, when you come to the social level and look at it in terms of a family, what makes a family? It's not the functional role of a husband and a wife and a father and a mother. It's not the functional roles that make the family. That only maintains the structure, right? What makes the family and what makes it a home is the dynamic between the male and the female. It's the dynamic between the children are nurtured based on the dynamic between the father and the mother, where the father is more strict, is more disciplinarian. He is the breadwinner of the family. He's the one who actually puts everything in order. The woman is the one who gives that order a life. She makes it breathe. She is the one who provides the emotional support, and the thoughts, which are rational, that are masculine in nature, are complemented by the emotions, right, which are dynamic, they are fluid, and they are feminine in nature. And the two always balance each other out. So a man can think out something and say, no, it's logical, we have to do A, B, C, D. But then the woman will provide an emotional perspective of it that will overrule anything logical, right? And people who experience love, why is love so confusing? Because love is not rational, it's not logical. The logical thing would be to do this, this, and that, but then your heart tells you, no, it's not working for me. That's what it entails. It's not about the social structure of whether men should be equal to women and women should be equal to men, and whatever a man can do, a woman can do also. Sure, as far as the outward world is concerned, a woman can also achieve the same functional role. But is that what you want to become? Because God created you as women to fulfill a role. And that role it has got its own maqam, right? Women in Islam have their own maqam, and in most cases they have a higher maqam than the men do, right? When the person asked, who do I owe most to, and the Prophet said, to your mother, and then again to your mother, and then again to your mother, and then to your father. Why? Because the woman's maqam is higher in that respect. So this is something that people need to focus on. It's not about, don't get caught up with these Western doctrines and philosophies of capitalism and all these aspects, and compromise your religious principles because of that. There's a reason why Allah has made the Sharia the way it is, and there's a reason why there is a distinguishing factor between men and women in Islam. And on the plus side also, the fault also lies between Muslim men who take advantage of that regulation, and they impose, and they use the Sharia and they use the fiqh to oppress women. They do that. It's there. But that's not Islam. That has to be understood. That's not what Islam is. They're doing whatever they want to do, right? Whatever thing they justify from the Sharia and from the fiqh. But they're doing it, and they'll be held accountable for that because it's an injustice. And they will be held accountable for that injustice.
Isn't Shaitan taking advantage of this aspect of our beings, the emotional part?
He does,
It
yes.
seems like the whole world is turning into basically controlled by emotion rather than logic. And like you said, literature, art, music, movies, Hollywood, all this connected to art and emotion, and they put that on a pedestal above everything else. And this is also why feminism and the LGBT movement is going strong, because it's all about love and emotion.
That's not emotion. That's the blameworthy level of emotion. So remember when we talked about the ghadab, the shahwa, the aql, all these three have got praiseworthy attributes and blameworthy attributes. What's being manipulated out there are the blameworthy attributes, and that's because a lot of people don't know that these are blameworthy attributes. So Iblis is playing on both sides. He's playing the rational tunes, and he's also playing on people's emotions. So a person might feel some sort of excitement from buying something designer for themselves, and they don't understand what true happiness entails. So they assume that that is giving them happiness, right? And now Iblis has realized that, oh, okay, so this is your weakness. It's no big deal. And so something new comes along, and he entices you by it, and then something new comes along, because you've deluded yourself into thinking that that's where I'm getting my happiness from. The book is written, Ghazali is written, كيمياء السعادة, is for this specific reason. He's saying that true happiness is something that the heart experiences on an existential level, not on a material level. And that's why he's refuting all these material attributions in the beginning. Because now what he wants to do is try to explain how that inward reality functions insofar as happiness is concerned. How do you understand contentment? Or how do you understand barakah? Where you can have so little of something and that yet it is so fulfilling at the same time. And it really makes you question reality to say, when I had so much of the same thing, I wasn't happy about it. Now I have so little of it and I'm happy with it. And he's going to talk about those components, the ghadab, the shahwa. In fact, he's going to talk about it in the chapter after next, under Ma'rifatul Qalb. And the first thing he starts off with is the quwa ghadabiyya. اعلم أنه قيل في مثل الشهوة والقوة شهوانية وإليها. He's going to talk about these things immediately, and he's going to explain what the difference between desire as lowly desire and what is the higher desire. What is the lower emotion? What's the difference between lust and love? And in Arabic is very specific because English doesn't do it justice, because there's a difference between muwadda and between ishq, right? There's a difference between those. And then there's a difference between that and hub. These are different kinds of love. So how do you distinguish between them? What's the bodily love that you feel? The attraction towards an opposite and the attraction towards the material allure. How do you distinguish that from inner love, from true love? Any other question?
We can only use that with the Quran. But if the kuffar don't believe in the Quran, then they will never understand our beliefs. They will just call it, oh yeah, it's just a belief, it doesn't matter. It's strange. Like the person last night, we kept talking, pointing out whenever I said the word belief, and like kind of laughing. I didn't understand why he was laughing. He was trying to distinguish belief from truth. Not really a question, but
Well, you could ask that person, what's your definition of belief? Because a lot of these people, they think that belief is an opinion. And since everyone is entitled to their own opinions, they're entitled to their own beliefs. And if they tell you that that's what it is, then you know exactly where they stand. So obviously we both have different definitions of belief. So now let me explain to you what belief really means. And that naturally opens the door to dawah. A lot of people actually have the wrong understanding of what a lot of these words and terms mean. Like, an atheist will say, I don't believe in God. Well, what's your definition of God? Because I might not believe in the same God.
that's why I asked them. They're like, my definition of God is something else than the Muslim version of God. I'm like, what? Do you know the Muslim version of God? They're like, yeah, it's all rules and blah blah blah. And I'm just like, so that's the only thing you got from it, then, huh? And they're like, yeah, I had a boyfriend that was Muslim. He was just, so controlling. Just like, so you base your whole aspect of Islam based on one person who probably didn't even follow correctly. And then, everyone in the room, when I said that to the woman in the room, everybody just started defending her, like, oh no, why are you so harsh? Why did you say that? I'm just like, what do you want? Like, I'm simply talking like logical discussion, and they make it into emotional argument, and then it's just like, I was like, that's why women should not be in a discussion with men. It's just like, it just turns the whole thing emotional.
Well, there are multiple ways you can apply that, depending on the kind of individuals you're having a discussion with. But if you formulate your arguments beforehand and sort of anticipate what sort of counter arguments they might give you, and then just work on those before you actually engage them, it makes your job a lot more easier. Because if they start attacking you and you don't have something ready to give them back, then you would be losing in that. You wouldn't really achieve what you set out to achieve. This is something I learned from reading Ghazali's books. He does that in his books. He actually anticipates what you would say as a counter argument, and he irons it out right there. So that's what like when he's saying about the qalb, or about the ruh, he's saying some of them, they say that it's this, and then he already has the argument in place. So you can't actually bring out an argument against him and expect to win in that regard. And that was his style, right? So he won almost every argument because he was really good in that in the execution of his argument. So I usually anticipate in myself, and I have things ready. I study them thoroughly, so I know if somebody attacks me, an atheist comes out and starts talking about, the prophet, and yeah, he married a 6-year-old and he was a pedophile. So I already have a counter argument against that. Just plain and simple. Number one, what defines a pedophile? What's the age limit of a pedophile? Number two, I have all the other hadith that are of the same, saying the same narrative, with different words. Some that say 9, some that said even 19. So, and they're sahih. So how do you reconcile that? There are a number of arguments that you can put across and easily defeat their claims.
much layers of lies to a rap. It's like even the evolution theory and like their whole paradigm is like, oh, the world is getting better as you move through time. In an Islamic perspective, everything is getting more corrupt as you move through time.
That's right. You're right in that. Yeah.
You know? Even that simple argument is the foundation of everything that's wrong with the society. Evolution theory, you know, we're all getting better.
Mm.
You know?
Their evolution theory is foundational to their understanding of reality, which again goes back to the language and how they understand reality using the language they think in. Because Western civilization argues that history is unfolding in a dialectic of a thesis, antithesis, and a synthesis. So we're basically fixing ourselves in the past as we are progressing towards a utopian future, right? But then the religion as a whole and Islam in specificity argues the opposite and says no, history is actually culminating to an end. It's not headed towards utopia. It is actually headed towards its end, and it's not a human history is not dialectic. Dialectic meaning you've got like this sort of a push and pull. You know, one says this, the other one says that, and then you iron things out as the argument progresses. That's not what it is. There are multiple parallel story timelines taking place in this story of the human being, and it's all cultivating or funneling towards a certain location. So it's like the Quran says that they don't even have shu'ur, right? وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. When it is said to them in Surah Baqarah, right? وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. قالوا إنما, they say قالوا إنما نحن مصلحون. We're just doing good. But they're told don't cause corruption. We're just doing good. We're just do-gooders, right? That's their fundamental argument. What do they say in all their global climate summits and their whatever, all these fancy organizations that they have, making the world a better place? Why are you making the world better? What was wrong with it to begin with? Like what was the issue that you had to make better? I'm pretty sure that everyone in history was happy with the way things were. But now you've got the greatest depression rate in the world ever in history. People were happier than they were before. So what are you trying to make better? and by the way, you ruined it in the first place. You guys are the ones who spoiled it. You came up with all these industrial machines and nuclear power plants because you wanted to watch the ball game in your house, right? You came up with all these things, polluting the climate. Your vaccinations, you're the ones who introduced the viruses in the first place. And now you're trying to make it a better place. Ala innahum humul mufsidun, Allah is saying. They're the ones who are causing corruption. Walakin la yash'urun. They don't have shu'ur. Shu'ur is a very sensitive kind of a perception, sense perception. It's very sensitive. It's like really when you touch the hair on your hand and you feel that's sharp. They don't even have that sense perception that they're the ones who are doing wrong. Salman al-Farisi, when he was asked about this ayah, he said it regards to a people who have not yet come. At that time, he said that was not relating to people in that present state. He said it was referring to people who are still going to come. Meaning us today. It's referring to us right now. And these are the statements that they're making. This is what they're saying. We're just trying to make the world a better place. Don't blame us. We have the degrees. You should listen to us. And look at the mess we are in. Astaghfirullah. Anyway, I think let's end for the night because I'm kind of exhausted as well. So inshallah we can continue through Ghazali's book, because he talks about لماذا خلق القلب, why was the heart created. Then he talks about what are the asakir, what are the soldiers of the heart. Then he talks about those three components, the quwa ghadabiyya and the shahwaniyya and the aqaliyya, which is a long chapter. And maybe we can move on from there to the Mishkat a little bit, just to touch on the mind and explain what the mind is. سبحانك وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.